Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. We've come to Oxford today to do the Sikh Spectrum from the St Antonys College here in Oxford, interviewing Jasleen Kaur and Sarbjeet Kaur. So this is an extra one that we've added, and I hope you enjoy it. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Today I've come to Oxford at the St Antonys College, and I'm going to interview two youngsters in terms of all the ones that I've been interviewing in the past. So let me introduce both of them first, and then we'll talk about what they've been doing. So on my right I have Sarbjeet Kaur from Peterborough. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. And sitting next to her is Jasleen Kaur from Oxford. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. When we first discussed about appearing on the Sikh Spectrum, I spoke to you, Sarbjeet, and said, look, you're doing a master's degree, and I found your topic quite interesting. It was different than the normal Sikh sort of science, Barniya. So why don't you tell us, before we talk about that, why don't you tell me something about yourself, where you grew up, your school you went to, and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, so I grew up in Peterborough. I went to the King's School, Peterborough. I studied at De Montfort. I did a degree in fine art. I am an artist, and I'm doing my master's degree at MMU.
Okay, and you got any brothers or sisters?
Yes, I have 3 brothers and 2 sisters, so quite a big family, but I'm very blessed. They're amazing, absolutely amazing people, all very creative, so yeah.
Good, good. So Jasleen, what about yourself, and where did you grow up?
I spent most of my formative years in Manchester, and then I was in Cardiff for my undergraduate degree, worked back in the northwest for a few years before working in a research lab in Australia, and then I worked in New Zealand for a couple of years. Then I came back to do a postgraduate degree in Manchester, and now I'm working here in Oxford between the Eye Hospital and clinical research in the university.
Right, good. And how many brothers and sisters have you got?
I've got 2 sisters.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about the degree, because that was the main reason for me to invite you here. What sort of what is the degree about?
Okay, so it's a master's in research, and the working title is Questions That Unbalance Me, Exploring Sikh Womanhood Through Sculpture. Now, basically what I'm looking at Sikh philosophy, which is very empowering in relation to women. And there's a lot of equality. It regards women and men on an equal platform. In terms of the notion of God, even though God is beyond gender, in the Guru Granth Sahib, it uses a female pronoun as well as a male pronoun. So, for example, Mota Mahat. So there's a lot of female imagery, etc. But what happens culturally is that there's a lot of inequality, and the lived experiences of women and girls, that very avant-garde philosophy doesn't get translated into the culture. So there are a lot of women who are disempowered. There's still a lot of inequality in society and the Gurdwara, for example. So those are the things I'm looking at, and I'm going to try and manifest them through sculpture, because I am an artist. And the reason being is I'm trying to connect to my own experiences firstly, and so hopefully so people can connect to the emotional aspect of that disempowerment, basically.
So when you said sculpture, I mean, you're referring to, so have you done some artwork already in this or not?
I have. At the moment it's a work in progress, so I've made some figureheads, and obviously art is very expressive and very personal, so I'm hoping people, like the artwork would resonate with people, but some would possibly argue that some of it's quite abstract. but we shall see.
Right. So, Jasleen, what sort of, how have you helped Sarbjeet in terms of whether it was her master's degree, I assume, because you're not in the same field?
No, I guess I'm a scientist, I'm a clinician, I'm in healthcare, but Sarbjeet and I met at the Gurdwara in Manchester when I was doing my postgraduate degree there, and we kind of felt we were kindred spirits, and I've become a bit of a sounding board, and we have a lot of discussions around the topic, and I've looked through some of her poetry and looked at pictures of her work, as well as read articles that she's written, so that's where my involvement into it comes in.
Right. So what are the issues that that girls, women are facing then in the community?
There's a lot of issues. I think on a very fundamental level, men and women aren't given the same respect within the community. So take within the Gurdwara, for example, when it comes to decision making, when it comes to deciding on policies and procedures, when it comes to relating successes, men are always put forward and women are always held back. Not always, but quite often there's a huge gap, and a woman has to prove herself twice as much, if not more so, than a man to be afforded the same respect.
Right.
When it comes to the issues of marriage, there's a lot of emphasis on women to behave in a certain way, to dress in a certain way, to meet certain ideals. I don't think men have the same emphasis placed on them. Women have a lot of emphasis on their behaviour, on their reputation. Why aren't men given the same emphasis? Why aren't they given the same drive to be careful of those things too? Because the Guru Granth Sahib Ji teaches us to live in a certain way, to live an upright moral life. Why is it only the woman that has to carry the board, as it were, on her shoulders?
Right. So, but Sarbjeet, how would you put that into expression of art then? Some of the points that Jasleen's just touched on.
Well, that is the most difficult part, I think. It's not an easy thing. I think it goes back to, even though, for example, I would talk to other women and girls and interview from my own kind of knowledge and observe things that are happening in the Gurdwara, I would go back to my own personal experience and feelings. So if I think about maybe an incident, even if it could be a small incident. For example, when I was younger, we used to go to Kirtan classes, and all the girls played the vajja and sang, and then the boys played the tabla, and I was always kind of going, I just really want to play the tabla. Why can't I play the tabla? And I was kind of almost told that actually, girls should sing and play the vajja. Boys must whistle, girls must sing, that kind of, that saying. So that's a small incident, and so I would manifest that in a sculpture. That's the hardest thing to describe. So that's why I suppose there's that saying, a picture says 1,000 words. You have to see it, you'll have to see it, and hopefully it will resonate. So it's quite hard to describe that. So it comes from my own personal experience, I suppose. Right,
and I think art is like that anyway. I mean, I
yeah.
recently went to an exhibition at the Udham Singh Reading Room,
yeah.
and the young girl there that was expressing everything, it was very, very personal, I think. But Jasleen, let me come back to a question that you mentioned about the Gurdwaras and the women's role. Do you not think sometimes women don't take the role themselves, rather than waiting for men, maybe, who we know can be very chauvinist in many ways, but why isn't that women aren't coming forward then?
I think there's a couple of reasons. The few women I know who have come forward have had to develop a very thick skin to deal with the environment. And also, you need support. You can't ever do anything on your own. Even Guru Nanak Dev Ji had support. I mean, at the beginning he had the support of Bhai Mardana Ji and Bibi Nanki Ji. So unless a woman has support of either her family or other men and women within the community, it's very difficult for her to cope and actually come forward and achieve anything. So there has to be some level of support there in the first place.
Right, right.
I also think there's one other issue there, and it's the way unmarried men and women are seen. So, because when a woman remains unmarried, no matter what age she is, she's always treated like a girl. She's spoken to like a girl, she's called a girl, that's how she's treated. When a man of the same age remains unmarried, that doesn't necessarily happen. He is treated like a man, he's treated like the community, and it's easier for him to come forward and get involved as well. So I think that is a major issue.
Yeah, definitely. Even in terms of, so despite the fact that the girl or woman may have achieved, you know, not in an egotistical way, but like academically, or she knows her own mind, or she has a great deal of knowledge about Gurbani, she's not given the same status, you know. And I'm not, because you know, some people say, well, isn't this all in your head? But it's not, because women who I've spoken to, if you actually ask the women themselves, not just presume, they will give you similar answers, that this is their experience, and that's again why I'm doing this master's.
So let me go back then. Talking about family life, I'd probably agree with you that within the family what happens is the boys are definitely treated different, and we were discussing this point that ਕੁੜੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ 10-12 ਸਾਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਰੋਟੀਆਂ ਸਿੱਖੋ ਬਣਾਉਣ ਨੂੰ, ਤੇ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਕਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਭਾਂਡੇ ਚੱਕੋ ਤੇ ਸਾਫ਼ ਕਰੋ. So he grows up with that attitude that when he gets married, basically he's looking a replacement for his mother, as opposed to thinking it's a joint relationship. Although, I mean, okay, it's changing, but that is more cultural, I think. Although in English society there are people in England that think the same. Do you not think that parents could do something about that?
I definitely think so, and it is a cultural thing, but I think if you're going to align yourself with Sikh philosophy and you're going to call yourself a Sikh, Sikhism is a very, well, I suppose you can say it's avant-garde, but it is truth, you know, and it is about equality. So, yes, the parents need to go beyond their cultural conditioning, and if they are going to call themselves a Sikh, really embody, you know, that true vibration where, you know, men and women are equal, girls and boys are equal. Not the same, they're not the same, but keep them on an equal platform. So in terms of cooking, you know, cooking is basic survival almost. You know, it's good to learn how to cook and clean. That's basic. Like if you did live by yourself, I've got a lot of young boys who go to university, and this is again is through experience, and this is again not only in terms of people who I've met at university, but also I'm talking about local people and even kind of immediate family. When they go to university, sometimes they struggle in terms of look after themselves in terms of food, etc. So those things are important, and parents, yes, they can do a bigger role by they themselves embodying equality and kind of going, you know, it's important for my son to learn how to cook and to clean and look after himself.
Well, I mean, let me just follow that on then, Jasleen, because one of the things that you're right about university. When boys go there, I think they'll probably struggle about eating and so on. But there is, you know, at home, it's where it's got to start. I mean, there's that definite sort of inequality, yet we'll go to the Gurdwaras and we'll always hear about equality, and they'll quote you loads of Bibiya's names in history. But on a practical level, that just isn't happening, I think. Is there?
Absolutely, and yes, there is there is a role for parents, especially for families where there are joint extended families. I think that's a situation where there's probably a bigger problem. But I also think you can't play the blame game. As soon as you start playing the blame game, that's it, game over. Nothing's going to change. Right. So it's up to individuals themselves to turn around and think, hang on a minute, this isn't right, this doesn't feel fair.
I mean, there was something, when did you start thinking about these issues in Sarbjeet? Because obviously there must have come a time when you thought, okay, I'm going to do this. Was there a time in your life that you thought, okay, I'm going to talk about this or think about this particular topic?
Well, actually, it's really interesting because I thought about it really young, even in terms of kind of when I was about 7 or 8, and on a practical level, looking at the pictures on the walls in the Gurdwara and kind of going, okay, so where are the women? You know, where are the images of the stories of women who must have been there in our history? For example, Banda Singh Bahadur, his son, you know, died, and he sacrificed a lot. And it was a great loss, but he still stayed true to Sikhi. But also, what about Bibi Jasleen Kaur, his wife? She also lost a son, but that story is not put forward, or even if perhaps now it might be told, but it's not kind of pushed forward. So in conferences or talks at the Gurdwara, if they give an example, if there's a PowerPoint presentation, they don't give many examples of women, or if they do, it's only a handful they mention. It's like Mata, you know, it's Mata Gujari ji, Mai Pago ji. So it's the same women.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's too much emphasis, or there seems to be only a handful of women. I mean, but with the example that you've given is a classic one, that Banda Singh Bahadur's wife. You would never hear anybody mention about her. So what can be done about Pracharaks, or do you think they Janke miss out those women?
I don't think it's Janke. I think it's kind of ignorant. I think it's dismissive. For example, a recent talk I went to, you know, they kind of mentioned, okay, well, we know Sikhism is about equality, so that should be enough. I don't need to include any women in here. And, you know, you kind of think, wow, are you for real? You know, go and ask the girl who's sitting in that talk. They want female role models. You know, they actually need female role models. They need images of women up there to feel empowered. You know, how are we going to relate to Sikhism if we only see one side of Sikhi? You need to bring women speakers in. You need to show images.
So what about, let's talk about Kathavachiks, or talk about Granthis for a second. I mean...
sorry, what's Katha?
These are the people that preach.
Okay.
Katha. So for example, in India, I know the most famous Kathavachik at the moment is a Gyani called Gyani Pindrapal Singh. Right, so here is a gentleman. I have hardly ever seen a lady give Katha, which means to give a service as such. It's always done by men. Just like the majority of the Kirtanwale are men. Okay, but the schools in India, or the Tiksaliyan, are geared for men. They're not really geared for women anyway. So that may be one reason. But in today's time, I would have expected more women to come out. But I mean, I can imagine it's not an easy life. You know, going around on the circuit from Gurdwara to Gurdwara. What do you think about that then, Jasleen, about, you know, more women coming in the front?
I think there are lots of women out there. They're just not given the opportunity by the Gurdwaras to come and do Kirtan. The SGPC doesn't allow women to do Kirtan, and what they do, a lot of other Gurdwaras will follow. So that needs to change. But also Gurdwaras on an individual level need to actually give women the opportunity. I mean, on a smaller level, we actually met at a Gurmat camp for kids. We were both helping out, and I wanted to be a speaker there. It was a struggle to become a speaker there and be able to do the topics I wanted to do to the audiences. I wanted to do that. And the excuse you often hear, that we've both often heard, is, oh, there aren't many good women speakers. Rubbish. There are lots of women speakers who want to be able to share, and they're just not given the opportunity.
I mean, just to add one point, when we came to Oxford this year to do the Sarbat Khalsa, which was a day seminar, which I thought was good actually, in many ways. I mean, that's the only way I got to know you. Yeah. We did pick you as our Jathedarni. I mean, on that day, of all the groups, we had picked someone, and actually you were the ideal person to fit that group, as a spokesperson for our group. But I mean, you're right, there is not many Gurdwaras in England. In fact, I don't know any where there is a woman who is the Pradhan or the Muksevadar of a Gurdwara. I have heard a few general secretaries now coming up on stage. So you think there's that sort of still issue about, you know, keep the girl behind rather than pushing her forward? And
well, I think it's not only about keeping the girl behind. I think, you know, it's all wrapped up in the whole thing about izzat, you know, and honour, and we're not going beyond that. You know, okay, so if we talk about izzat, you know, and in terms of if a woman kirtani goes from Gurdwara to Gurdwara, okay, if you're talking about respect, you know, kind of honouring her and making sure she's safe, then why don't the support networks to ensure she's safe. So you kind of go beyond that issue. So, you know, have a room and make sure she's with other women, etc., etc. Have those sort of networks there in place and those systems in place. So that whole thing about is it, to be honest, I think it's quite backwards, you know. And people also talk about the grace of a woman. So people go, well, actually, no, it's kind of graceful that women stay behind and they accept their role as, you know, kind of just almost the soil, and then kind of the men are the grass, you know, basically, and kind of go forward. But not even in that sense, you know, because I'm dissing men, but what I'm saying is you can also be a graceful leader. You can be a graceful spokesperson. You can be a graceful Kirtani. But also, I think it's also not only about men, it's also women become the agencies of, I suppose, in some ways, oppression. So
okay.
Women also kind of oppress other women.
Okay, but what about the generation gap? I mean, you know, those kids that are growing up now, second, third generation in the UK. What about those, Jasleen? Do you think they've still got the same atta as their parents, or is it slightly moving?
I think it is moving, but a lot of attitudes are ingrained from quite a young age, so it's quite difficult to completely get away from that. And as I said, unless you've got support, it's very difficult to break away. So unless you have your own social network to help pull you forward, it's very difficult to disengage from those attitudes.
For example, you know, talking about support now, because you you kind of get instilled this kind of fear in you as well, like don't be outspoken, you know, ena kar, ona kar, you know, edana bet, you know, ena, you know, all those things. So you do kind of have that ingrained in you. So I think I personally would have found it more difficult, for example, to do this talk if I didn't have the support of Jasleen. I think I would have been, not that I'm not, you know, kind of strong-minded, etc., but you do have an element of fear, etc., because no one wants to be shunned from the community as such. So I think it's important to have that support. And
speaking of Izzat, I think also people are very quick to judge women. So if you see a lone woman, especially of a certain age, people are very quick to come to conclusions, whereas they don't necessarily do that so quickly with a man. Modern day Sikhi has been mixed up with culture, Indian or Punjabi culture, and a lot of Sikh philosophy is at loggerheads with culture, with the traditional culture, and that's what the gurus were trying to pull us away from. So what we need to start doing is trying to tease out what's culture and what's Sikhi, and then only can we start living according to the principles of Sikh philosophy. At the moment there's just too much confusion, and that's where these problems come from.
So what about, you know, I won't call you youngsters, but you are younger than me, but what about going and giving talks in gurdwaras or other universities? I mean, I've been hearing all the good work that the Sikh university, you know, societies now do, and this Oxford's no difference, that's why we're here today. What about those societies? Do you not think you should have more women coming to them than like yourselves?
You know, yes, I mean, I have done a talk at a couple of societies, but sometimes it's not well attended, because that's the other thing, you know, sometimes you feel, well, you know, if I'm not wearing a turban, you know, I might not be given as equal status, or oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about, she's being rebellious. But I'm not against men or anything like that. I'm just, you know, but definitely I think, you know, women should be given that platform. And so if anyone wants me to give a talk...
That's fine. We'll take you up on that for the universities, because we are going to be doing that. But Jasleen, what about... I mean, there are some student unions that I've seen that they do have women now as their presidents, which is better than the Gurdwaras, at least in the Sikh unions that they start to do that now.
Yeah, well, during my undergrad days there weren't enough Sikhs at my university to have a student society, so I've never really had exposure to that side of it. And I've never really known how to kind of get involved in that. But if more women can get involved, I think that's absolutely fantastic, and we should all support them. And I'd love to see possibly a professional network develop for Sikh women, so that there's a place where people can go to if they want someone to speak on a certain topic, and they can find a female with an
Right.
interest.
So there's not one set up at the moment then that you're aware of.
Not that I'm aware of. You know, I even kind of, you know, again, my personal experience at a gunboat camp, one of the youngsters asked, you know, how come there weren't a female speaker, and the answer they got was they couldn't find one. And it's like, well, there are female speakers out there. You just either aren't looking, or, you know, I'm not sure what's going on. So
No, and I'm quite surprised at the number of you know, Sikh girls that I found that are studying just topics like yourself, or researching into the Sikh sort of you know, ideology, and that could do, I think, great talks outside. But I think you're right. There is an opportunity thing, but not being given. What about? But what do you both hope to achieve by doing this? Let me bring that question into it now.
Just want to empower and inspire the next generation of women, so that they will stand up and they will be able to break themselves free from the cultural shackles and the inequality, and in turn hope they inspire the next generation, and so on, until we do reach a level of equality that Guru Nanak Dev Ji would be proud of.
Yes, no, I think you're right. I think that's it's got to be practical, pragmatic in many ways. Otherwise, it's not going to work. I mean, what do you think about that then, in terms of, you know, what can be done about that as well?
Well, in terms of what we hope to achieve, it's kind of giving kind of a space for dialogue and discussion, firstly, and Gurdwaras being more in line with Gurbani in terms of that equality, and in terms of steps to achieving those goals. I think it is about creating discussion, like having this discussion.
Everyone's on their own spiritual journey, and it's only by sharing and getting different perspectives that you can advance in that spiritual journey. So getting only male perspective or getting only female perspective isn't really going to help as much as getting both. The other observation I have is that we've become very Abrahamical in our viewpoint, in that we've become very God-fearing. You know, our whole lives are governed by fear. We're afraid of God, we're afraid of society, we're afraid of what people will say, we're afraid of ourselves. Whereas Gurbani teaches us love, it teaches us to be God-loving, and when you do things from a place of love and understanding and respect, that's a lot more powerful than when you do things from fear. So I think a lot of these issues would disappear if we became more God-loving rather than God-fearing, and understanding and not being afraid of the opposite gender, I think, is a big step on that road.
Right. No, that's a valid point. But I do want to go back to one thing about that you mentioned about the Harmandir Sahib, where women don't do kirtan. They have been trying there as well, I have to say. You know, it takes time because they're set in their ideas. You know, is there something that you know, some advice that you would give them? Because I don't think you can have equality everywhere. Like, there are some duties that only a man can do. I don't think we should get confused with that.
Kirtan is not one of them.
No, you're right. No, Kirtan is definitely not one of them. But I mean, for example, there was some heavy work that you wouldn't expect women to do. You know, even in the army today, the front line is not with women. I mean, there are certain things that you just don't expect women to do. So sometimes I think
you have to take that like case by case, because actually in Vietnam women do fight in the front line. So I think, and also there's some women who can actually cope with, you know, heavy work, and there's some men who really can't cope with heavy work, because even in terms of the physical side and biological side, you know, you have endomorph, ectomorph, and mesomorph. You've got different body types, and so some men are not equipped in that way. But I don't think we're saying that men and women have to be the same. And also, it's not about being stupid about it. It's about kind of looking at things by case, I guess, and looking at it in context. So It's not about saying, oh, we want equality, we need to do everything that men do. It's not about that. It's about creating discussion. It is about working together and
helping each other.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
But also, if you're stopping a woman doing anything, give a valid reason. You know, if they could give a valid reason, either physical or spiritual, for why women can't do kirtan, then fair enough. I'm happy to accept that. You know, some physical jobs can't do, makes total sense. But when there's no valid reasons, I think that's where it's great.
All right, well, that's we've come to the end of the show. I want to thank both Sarbjeet and Jasleen for sharing their thoughts with me, and I hope it's going to inspire, you know, lots of other women to come forward, or ladies to come and talk to me about what they're doing. And you're right, by networking together, it can make a big difference. Mm-hmm. And you're right, a small difference today will just grow and grow and grow. And so let's hope that this type of interviews help other people. So with that, I want to thank both of you. So let's do Fateh now. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
My master's degree at MMU.
Okay, and you got any brothers or sisters?
Yes, I have 3 brothers and 2 sisters, so quite a big family, but I'm very blessed. They're amazing, absolutely amazing people, all very creative, so...
Good, good. So Jasleen, what about yourself then? Where did you grow up?
I spent most of my formative years in Manchester, and then I was in Cardiff for my undergraduate degree, worked back in the northwest for a few years before working in a research lab in
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Today I've come to Oxford at the St. Antonys College, and going to interview 2 youngsters in terms of all the ones that I've been interviewing in the past. So let me introduce both of them first, and then we'll talk about what they've been doing. So on my right, I have Sarbjeet Kaur from Peterborough. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. And sitting next to her is Jasleen Kaur from Oxford. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. We've come to Oxford today to do the Sikh Spectrum from the St. Antonys College here in Oxford, interviewing Jasleen Kaur and Sarbjeet Kaur. So this is an extra one that we've added, and I hope you enjoy it. When we first discussed about appearing on the Sikh Spectrum, I spoke to you, Sarbjeet, and said, look, you're doing a master's degree, and I found your topic quite interesting. It was different than the normal Sikh sort of science, Barniya. So why don't you tell us, before we talk about that, why don't you tell me something about yourself, where you grew up, your school you went to, and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, so I grew up in Peterborough. I went to the King's School, Peterborough. I studied at De Montfort. I did a degree in fine art. I am an artist, and I'm doing
Australia, and then I worked in New Zealand for a couple of years. Then I came back to do a postgraduate degree in Manchester, and now I'm working here in Oxford between the Eye Hospital and clinical research in the university.
Right, good. And how many brothers and sisters have you got?
I've got 2 sisters.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about the degree, because that was the main reason for me to invite you here. What sort of what is the degree about?
Okay, so it's a master's in research, and the working title is Questions That Unbalance Me, Exploring Sikh Womanhood Through Sculpture. Now, basically what I'm